Think about that drawer in your house. You know the one stuffed with things you don't want to deal with. You close it, forget about it, and pretend it's not there. But over time, the drawer gets so full that it won't stay shut anymore. Everything spills out, leaving a mess you can't ignore. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we'd rather not see. These could be fears, desires, or impulses that feel too uncomfortable or wrong to face. But just because you've shoved them out of sight doesn't mean they've gone away. They're still there, quietly influencing your actions, your relationships, and even the way you see yourself. In this video, we'll dive into why ignoring your shadow side can hold you back and even sabotage your future. But it's not all doom and gloom. By facing this hidden part of yourself, you can unlock strength, clarity, and balance. Together, let's explore how Carl Jung's ideas can guide us in better understanding who we truly are. The shadow isn't as mysterious as it might sound. It's simply the unconscious side of you. It's made up of the fears, desires, and traits you've tucked away because they don't fit the image you want to show the world. Think of it like the clutter in your closet. You stuff it in, close the door, and convince yourself it's no longer there. But sooner or later, it spills out into your living space, leaving you wondering how things got so out of hand. Psychologist Carl Jung believed the shadow begins to form in childhood. As we grow, we learn which behaviors, emotions, or thoughts are acceptable to others. Traits that don't align with what's expected, whether it's anger, selfishness, or even creativity, get pushed into this hidden part of ourselves. But here's the thing, Jung didn't see the shadow as purely negative. It's not evil. It's simply the parts of you that you've chosen to ignore, for better or worse. Think about it. How many times have you acted in a way that felt out of character, only to later realize you were reacting to something deeper? Maybe you avoided speaking up in a meeting because you were afraid of being judged, or perhaps you lashed out at a friend over something small, only to realize later it was really about your own insecurities. That's your shadow at work, sneaking into your life in ways you don't expect. Jung described the shadow as a part of the psyche that demands recognition. The more you try to suppress it, the stronger its influence becomes. It's not a monster waiting to harm you. It's a neglected part of yourself that wants to be understood. Ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. Instead, it shows up in unexpected ways, often in the form of self-sabotage or tension in your relationships. So, why do we resist facing the shadow? Often, it's fear. Fear of what we might find, fear of being judged, or fear of change. But denying these parts of ourselves only gives them more power if the shadow isn't inherently bad, as Jung suggested. The real question is, what happens when we refuse to confront it? Suppressing the shadow might seem like a solution. It feels easier to lock those parts of yourself away than to face them head-on. But here's the catch. Repressing your shadow doesn't erase it. Instead, it festers in the background, building pressure like a sealed pot of boiling water. And just like that pot, eventually, it explodes. When you ignore these hidden parts, they find other ways to manifest. Psychologists have long observed that unresolved inner conflicts often show up as destructive behaviors. For example, you might procrastinate on a project, not because you're lazy, but because deep down, you fear failing, or even succeeding. Or maybe you criticize others harshly, not realizing you're projecting your insecurities onto them. These actions feel out of your control because they're driven by the parts of you that you've refused to acknowledge. Imagine trying to maintain a perfect appearance while ignoring everything beneath the surface. Over time, the cracks start to show. You might find yourself repeating harmful patterns, like sabotaging relationships or avoiding opportunities. And the worst part, you're left wondering why everything feels so chaotic. Without realizing the role your repressed shadow is playing, Jung described this repression as a kind of blindness. When we deny parts of ourselves, we lose clarity about who we are and what drives our behavior. This lack of self-awareness doesn't just create personal turmoil. It can also harm the people around us. For example, blaming others for our unhappiness or pushing them away because of our unresolved emotions creates unnecessary strain on relationships. So, what's the cost of repression? It's the energy spent keeping parts of yourself locked away, the missed opportunities caused by self-doubt, and the growing distance between the life you want and the one you're living. The good news is, this isn't a permanent state. By beginning to recognize and work with your shadow, you can break free from these cycles. After all, isn't it better to confront the storm than let it silently destroy everything in its path? Ignoring the shadow doesn't just affect your present moment. It has the power to shape your future in ways you can't even see coming. It's like trying to drive a car with a flat tire. You can keep going, but every mile you cover just makes things worse. Eventually, the damage becomes impossible to ignore. Think about how the shadow sneaks into your life. Sometimes, it's not the big dramatic outbursts that give it away, but the subtle, everyday actions. Maybe you hesitate to take a new job because you fear you won't measure up. Or maybe you settle for less than you deserve in relationships, because you've convinced yourself that's all you can have. These aren't random decisions. They're shaped by the unconscious beliefs and fears stored in your shadow. Jung warned that the shadow creates a kind of self-imposed blindness. We act according to patterns and impulses that we aren't fully aware of, blaming external circumstances for our struggles, when the root cause often lies within us. For example, if you find yourself constantly frustrated with the people around you, it might not be them. It might be something about yourself that you've yet to confront. When left unchecked, this unconscious influence can have a real impact on your career, your relationships, and your well-being. Opportunities might slip through your fingers because you're unknowingly holding yourself back. You might even push away people who could support you because you're projecting your fears or insecurities onto them. The more you ignore the shadow, the more it controls you, until one day, it's too late to undo the damage. But it's not all doom and gloom. Acknowledging the shadow isn't about feeling ashamed or guilty. It's about understanding your hidden motives and becoming empowered by them. By seeing the shadow for what it is, you can start making conscious choices that move you toward a brighter, more authentic future. The path to growth isn't always smooth, but it's the only way to break free from the patterns that hold you back. The first step in working with your shadow isn't about fixing it or getting rid of it. It's about acknowledging it. Think of it like tending to a garden you've neglected for too long. Before you can start pulling out the weeds or planting new seeds, you have to admit that the garden is overgrown, and it's time to face it. Carl Jung famously said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This means that the path to self-awareness begins with recognizing the parts of ourselves we'd rather avoid. It's only when we bring the shadow into the light that we can begin to understand its true nature. And yes, that means facing the parts of us that feel messy, uncomfortable, or even shameful. This process of recognition doesn't have to be dramatic. It can start small. Maybe it's noticing a pattern in your behavior, like getting defensive when someone challenges you. Maybe it's realizing that your fear of failure is stopping you from pursuing something you really care about. These are the first signs that your shadow is trying to get your attention. Acknowledging it means simply accepting that this part of you exists, and that it's okay. The beauty of this first step is that it doesn't require perfection. You don't need to have everything figured out right away. What matters is the willingness to look at your own darkness with compassion. Rather than judgment, once you do that, you begin to take the first steps toward integrating the shadow into your life in a healthy way. So, what would happen if you stopped running from your inner darkness? What could you discover about yourself that might have been hidden for years? The truth is, embracing your shadow is the first key to understanding who you really are, beyond the masks you wear for the world. Now that we've talked about recognizing the shadow, the next step is learning how to work with it. Just as you can't simply ignore a messy room and expect it to clean itself, you can't just acknowledge your shadow and hope it'll sort itself out. You need tools, methods, and patience. One of the most effective tools for shadow work is journaling. It's like having a conversation with yourself, putting your thoughts and emotions on paper so you can look at them from a distance, writing down your feelings, even the ones that seem irrational or uncomfortable, can help you identify patterns and gain insight into your hidden fears or desires. Over time, this practice can bring clarity and self-awareness. Another powerful tool is therapy. Working with a therapist who understands Jungian psychology, or even just someone who can help you explore your emotions, can make a huge difference. Therapy offers a safe space to uncover parts of yourself that you may have buried, and it provides a structure to help you process and integrate these aspects of your psyche. Mindfulness practices also play a huge role in shadow work. When you become more aware of your thoughts and reactions in the moment, you begin to notice when your shadow is influencing your behavior. Meditation, deep breathing, or simply pausing throughout your day to check in with yourself can help you recognize when you're acting from unconscious patterns and give you the space to choose a different response. Shadow work isn't easy. It's like learning a new language. You need to practice, and it takes time. But the more you engage in these practices, the more natural it becomes to face and integrate your shadow. It's not about perfection. It's about making progress and allowing yourself to grow. So, what tools will you start using to confront your shadow? The right ones for you will help turn your self-reflection into true growth. When you start facing your shadow, it's not just about clearing away the darkness. It's about discovering hidden treasures that were always there. Imagine stumbling upon an old attic full of forgotten things. At first it seems like clutter, but as you dig through it, you find rare items that hold more value than you realized. The truth is, the shadow holds more than just negative traits. Jung believed that it is through the shadow that we can tap into parts of ourselves that we didn't know existed. It's like finding untapped potential buried deep beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The parts of us that we've rejected often carry incredible strength and wisdom that can fuel us in ways we never imagined. Think about a quality you might have avoided. Maybe you've always considered yourself too sensitive and rejected your emotional side. But in reality, those very emotions can give you the empathy, intuition, and connection you need to navigate life with more depth and understanding. Instead of running from it, you could embrace your sensitivity as a strength, helping you build meaningful relationships and make more grounded decisions. Jung argued that when we embrace our shadow, we move closer to self-actualization. It's like polishing a gemstone. What was once rough and hidden becomes something beautiful and radiant. By accepting the shadow's gifts, we don't just transform ourselves. We open the door to greater creativity, resilience, and authenticity. Imagine what could happen if you accepted the parts of you that you've been running from. What if that anger, jealousy, or sadness you've avoided was actually a source of power? By accepting these traits, you unlock the ability to use them in ways that serve you, your relationships, your work, and your personal growth. The shadow is not just about darkness. It's about understanding that within the darkness lies the potential for something extraordinary. When you start integrating your shadow, something incredible begins to happen. Your relationships start to change as you become more self-aware and more accepting of your hidden parts. You begin to see others in a new light too. It's like cleaning a foggy mirror. You can finally see people for who they really are, not through the distortions caused by your own unresolved emotions. Think about how often we project our fears or insecurities onto others. We might criticize someone for something we secretly dislike about ourselves, or push people away because we're afraid they'll see parts of us that we've hidden. This projection creates distance in our relationships, making it harder to connect on a deeper level. But when we integrate our shadow, we stop projecting. We start seeing people for who they truly are, without the filter of our own fears and biases. Jung described projection as one of the biggest barriers to healthy relationships. When we project our shadow onto others, we misunderstand them, misinterpret their actions, and create unnecessary conflict. But by owning our shadow, we stop blaming others for traits that are really ours to work with. This shift allows us to build more genuine connections, based on mutual understanding rather than judgment. This doesn't mean that embracing your shadow automatically makes relationships perfect, far from it. But it does mean that by becoming more whole, you're able to show up more fully in your relationships. You're less likely to be triggered by things that used to set you off, and more able to handle conflict in a healthy way. You'll start communicating more authentically, and you'll attract people who appreciate you for who you truly are, not for the version you've been trying to hide. What if your relationships could be based on acceptance, vulnerability, and genuine connection, instead of fear and projection? By embracing your shadow, you create space for deeper, more fulfilling connections with others. And in the process, you start to build the kind of relationships that support your growth, rather than hinder it. Integrating your shadow isn't just about understanding the past. It's about creating a future that's truly your own. Imagine trying to build something, whether it's your career, relationships, or personal goals, on a foundation made of sand. No matter how much effort you put into it, the structure will always crumble. Now picture building that same foundation with solid rock. It might take longer to lay down, but it will support you for years to come. That's what integrating your shadow can do for your future. When you embrace your shadow, you gain access to parts of yourself that were once blocked off. Those hidden fears, desires, and traits don't just disappear. They become assets. The more you understand them, the more control you gain over your life. You stop making decisions from a place of fear or unconscious patterns, and instead, you start making choices from a place of awareness. You're no longer reacting to life. You're actively shaping it. Jung believed that true self-realization requires a balance between the conscious and unconscious. Without integrating the shadow, we are essentially living half a life. We might find success or fulfillment, but it will feel shallow or incomplete because we are ignoring vital parts of ourselves. The future you want to create is only possible when you can look at your whole self, both the light and the dark, and make choices that honor both. So, what kind of future could you create if you embraced all parts of yourself? By integrating the shadow, you're not just freeing yourself from old patterns. You're building a future based on a deeper understanding of who you truly are, and when you're aligned with yourself, your possibilities become endless. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's a part of you that's been waiting to be understood. Ignoring it doesn't make it go away. In fact, it only makes it more destructive, sabotaging your relationships, your goals, and your peace of mind. But when you start to embrace it, something shifts. The very parts of you that you feared or rejected become a source of strength, creativity, and wholeness. Jung was right. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. As you face your shadow, you open the door to self-awareness, balance, and empowerment. The fear of confronting your darkness is real, but the growth that follows is even more powerful. The more you understand yourself, the more you can transform not just your life, but the way you interact with the world around you. If you've made it this far, thank you. The fact that you're still here shows a willingness to explore what many shy away from. It's not easy work, but it's worth it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of your shadow are you ready to embrace? Share your journey below, because your story might inspire someone else to take that first step.